Hi everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion. This is a bit of a different one. It's not going to come really heavily from game development side, so a bit more on the business side. The struggles with commercializing VR and AR, which is kind of where my business struggles, and just kind of building what the ethics are and what are the kind of rules that we should kind of share with each other coming from businesses that make tools for other businesses. So I just thought I'd start with us introducing ourselves, because this is also the first time we've met, so maybe learn a bit about each other as well. I'm Aliesha Staples, and I founded Staples VR, and we started as an equipment supplier for the film industry, and we started moving into new and emerging technology. So VR became a part of what we started doing. And this was all live action cinematic side of things. And as that evolved over the last couple of years, we moved a lot into realizing we actually needed to bring on board some game developers, which is where Krystal and her team kind of came on board with our company, which is now moving further than just creating 360 videos or stills. It's about making interactive, educational tools for business. So that's kind of what I do. I'll pass over to Krystal.
Hi everyone, as Aliesha said, I'm from Staples VR, and another thing that we wanted to bring into the panel, because when we talk about business, we always get asked about the design of it as well, and a lot of these tools we make for AR VR has game development attached to it, because there's a whole bunch of things that you need to consider in game design that you also need to consider when you're working with the Oculus, the Vive, or 360 headsets. So I was brought on to bring game development into how we release to these platforms. And I'm a bit of a generalist. I work from technical art to programming to physical design. I studied game design and extrinsic motivations and stuff like that is key things to consider when designing. So that's sort of what I do at Staples, and manage a team of other VR developers as well.
Hi, I'm Amie. I'm co-founder of Geo AR Games and the sole developer. So we make augmented reality games for kids aged 6 to 11 on smartphones and tablets. And it's a game designed to get them outside. So they play in park spaces, chasing kittens, catching dinosaur eggs. And our key motivation was to bring augmented reality to smartphones and tablets in a way that makes sense for consumers. So a lot of apps we found don't make a lot of sense. They're just gimmicks, or they're just promoting the technology. So we're really trying to make it practical.
I'm Emre Deniz. I'm the CEO of Opaque Space. Opaque Space is a part of a larger media group called Opaque Media Group that operates from Melbourne, Australia. We predominantly operate in the emerging technologies spaces, pun intended, in space and aerospace, as well as aviation, and more recently looking at things like non-lethality defense projects and things like that. So looking at how virtual reality and augmented reality and mixed reality can be employed in anything from extreme environmental training to enterprise and B2B tools. Yeah, and that's it. And
hi, I'm Jennifer Scheurle. I'm also from Opaque Space, but I'm here to represent the game design side of things. So yeah, I work also with weird space NASA collaborations on games. I've been a game designer for about 6.5 years now, and I have a specific passion that relates to bringing game development and other fields together, because I feel like we could really learn a lot from each other. Yeah, that's me.
Cool. So our panel discussion is going to be pretty informal, and rather than waiting for questions at the end, if you have something that that's interesting to you, just throw your hand up or wave, and I'll bring you into the discussion, because I think we have some other companies that are dealing with the same issues that we are in the room. So just hearing everybody's angle on how they've had this this building games for non-gamers kind of interface come up, and how you've been solving these different issues. So my first kind of throw over to you guys is, with all these facts and figures that are being thrown around in AR and VR with millions of this and how many people are doing that, when you look at the things that we're doing that are on a smaller business-to-business platform, do you think this is going to accelerate mainstream VR and how it's going to do that? So bringing in essentially people that are non-gamers, teaching them that it's a tool and asset for their company, how you've kind of seen that growing faster and pushing out mainstream. Who wants to take that one?
Our dealings with enterprise right now is more about education. A lot of VR companies, especially during the hype train, were composed of people that bought a HD. And they were very, very good at drumming up hype and expectations and creating an air of VR being a silver bullet for the needs of any business. So on the other side of that, being the people left to clean it up, a lot of the businesses that are operating in the VR space right now are doing essentially re-education of businesses or introducing a technology in ways that help augment but not replace existing methods, or to provide tools and support mechanisms to help drive down costs of overheads, or the anecdotal thing that we kind of use as an example is to help reduce backlogs, for example, in restricted spaces or limited areas where training may take place. So it's been an interesting process, basically, in terms of helping adjust the market so that people have more healthy expectations of what the technology can and can't do, or the context of its use as well.
Do you find as well that the international marketing material, even on the hardware, is an issue? Like when you see things like marketing videos for a HoloLens and this amazing motorcycle that you can see right in front of you, and then you've got a client come to you and say, we want that. And then how you manage that expectation to actually deliver something that's not going to disappoint them and is still helpful.
The marketing campaign of HoloLens has been rubbish. I think that Microsoft very rightfully did a good job on destroying its own ecosystem before being able to actually grow it into anything. Like you have, and this is coming from people that are partnered with Microsoft for a very long time. And of course, we have a bit of a grudge in regards to how that ecosystem was handled, because they've ended up scrapping a lot of the enterprise support and the B2B support for the HoloLens platform. It's great that the mixed reality headset has come out, but motorcycles with great, I guess, complexity and exploding kind of parts.
And a massive field of view.
And their hand gestures. Those were things that were really problematic, because that was at the same time that JPL was using the HoloLens to do Martian terrain navigation, or using the HoloLens to do the AutoCAD views of the Mars 2020 rover. But picking unrealistic examples of advertising technology seemed to have been a better executive decision at the time, instead of using the real world, like operational uses of augmented reality to drive home the applications of the technology as they were being used in industries today. I think that had some really good long-lasting damage, and has cost many augmented reality developers across the world. Like a lot of people bought the HoloLenses, but now for what? What are you going to build with it now? And we've already seen that the platform has already shifted past it. So yeah,
I feel like that's even true for some other use cases of VR technology. Like I think a lot of our work is spent talking to external parties that want to work with us about what they can expect and what different platforms are out there. And it's like for people who are new to this, it's all just VR and that's it. But like among VR, you can talk about interactive headsets like the Vive and the Oculus, but we also call VR what is mobile VR, which is completely different as an experience, right? So a lot of people, I feel like, have tried VR as mobile VR and have been turned away from it because it's not as interesting as they expected it to be. So I feel like we kind of keep shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit with these super strange marketing campaigns or the way we present VR or AR, and people don't have a real good understanding of what the capabilities are yet.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. We're working with someone at the hospital, and he is really into new technologies and stuff, and he will always come to us with all these new things that he's like, oh, this is awesome and this is awesome. And then I sit down with him and look through it, and I said, well, actually, if you read here, like, this isn't actually possible and this has been faked and stuff like that. And I feel like sometimes when we show him stuff that we make, he gets disappointed because it's not what he's seen. But a lot of what you see out there is completely fabricated, or like a proof of concept that they've sort of tweaked to look better, and it's really hard to make your work stand out beside things that aren't actually up to the scratch of what actually exists or what can be done.
For us, a lot of the questions we have are, why aren't you making games for adults? So we make games for kids, for 6 to 11-year-olds, and it's outdoor augmented reality, and it's floaty. And the tracking, it's not what you see in the promotional material. You can't track planes outdoors. There's a whole bunch of issues with that. So people constantly asking, why can't we make games for adults? Because adults are going to see that, and they're going to look at the promotional material that they've seen, and it's going to be totally different. Kids don't care. Kids are happy to see dinosaurs. Don't care if the dinosaurs are a metre off the ground or, not quite tracking perfectly. They're just really excited to be out there, playing with a T-Rex. And so we've deliberately chosen a market that the technology is fit for, not trying to push the technology to a market that won't accept it as it is.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly to that, I find that again, coming from a non-gaming background, I'm normally the one that breaks our stuff first. I'm given it to test before it goes to a game tester because I spend so little time inside of a game engine. And so the struggles that I know Krystal deals with, particularly with me, and I'm sure you guys deal with your clients, is making a game for a non-gamer and how the interface has to be different because there's no intuitive, like I get it or I understand how this should work. It's like designing a game for someone who's never actually played a game. And how do you deal with that? Like, do you have a structure? Do you have a different way of testing? So I know you have a way of doing your development, and I've had to I think I've ruined Krystal's way of developing based on how quickly I break things. How you deal with making user interfaces for people who just aren't intuitive in this whatsoever.
It's a really difficult question because I feel like I haven't figured it out entirely myself for obvious reasons, because it's new technology and it will take time until we have established, best practices and so on. I've been surprised by how different my QA implementation, and I'm testing with mostly gamers and mostly people who are at least a little bit familiar with VR, and how incredibly different it is to, I may have done a feature or, a build that is ready, and I've tested it with gamers or with people who are a little bit used to VR. And then we're putting it out to a client and they're just like, oh, it sucks. And we're like, whoa, okay.
It was amazing.
Yeah, and our QA progress showed it was amazing. And all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore because it's almost like you have to build two products, right? Where one is for people who will invest, who are usually not gamers, even if they eventually will put it to gamers. It doesn't really matter, because if they can't figure it out, then it doesn't matter if it will work for their audience sometimes. So I don't have a straight answer for it, but I think I've tried to define my audience a little bit more, because right now, because VR is so new, it has this audience that is VR audience, but within that audience we have just as much variety as in any other audience, right? Which is a problem, because we have to then also start defining, like you did, what exactly within the AR or VR audience you're going to target. So. And I feel like we also have to then educate potential investors on that part as well, and maybe start showing them QA procedures, and that it worked with this certain group of people, and that it might not work for them themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I find as well that it touches on a little bit of what you said before, but we get a call out of nowhere from a company that just wants to be seen as innovative or forward thinking. So they actually couldn't care what you're making them, just so long as it's in this industry. And then trying to dial that back to be like, well, we don't want to make something that is completely useless. It needs to be something that helps develop something faster, or saves you money, or does something from like a bigger perspective. So do you have like it almost is like we need to put together a list of how we would do it and how you guys do it and see if it's the same. But is there a way you guys see going forward where we actually have some type of platform put together with the right questions, like, does it even need to be made in AR? Does it even need to be made in VR? Should you just take a camera and shoot this traditionally? Or is this a pen and paper type thing where actually you don't need... your business partner gave me an example before about a treasure hunt. Just use it, just go and treasure hunt. You don't need to do it in AR. So it's like, has it gone too far almost? And it's now trying to pull everybody back to what's realistic and helpful.
Yeah, I think a really valuable thing to do is to go back to Business 101 and say, what problem are you solving? And for example, I've seen some pretty cool tabletop games converted or turned into AR versions, but are they adding any value? You know, they look cool, and I don't know, it's cool to watch in a video or demo video, but when you actually get out there playing, is it adding anything to the game? Is it really adding something?
Yeah.
And so you can take this lesson for games that have been made in AR, tabletop games, because they work quite well, the tracking on flat surfaces. But I've yet to see an AR game version that will capture me in the way that a PC game has or console game has. And so why try and reinvent it? Because all that's going to happen is people are going to look at these things, or they're going to play them, and they're going to go, this is crap. You know, why would I do this? And when someone genuinely comes up with an AR game that really works for the technology, people will be more reluctant to try it. And this transforms perfectly into business case. And businesses will see the technology, and they will either have unrealistically high expectations because of fabricated promotional material, or they have stupendously low expectations because they've repeatedly seen examples of things that just don't work, that don't provide value, that don't show them the returns that they were expecting to see because they adopted a new technology. And why on earth are we not getting the positive feedback that we thought we would get from being so advanced and so technologically savvy? So you've really got to say, why are we using VR AR? Is it really necessary, or are we just throwing it in there because we can?
And the other side of that as well is it's always easier to convince someone to use a new technology that they've had a good experience with than to bring them back around when they've had a bad experience.
Oh, yeah,
and
that's
that comes
so hard.
from a client kind of side as well. We're like, if they've tried to do something in this medium and someone's under-delivered or over-promised or done something that's actually made them go, well, let's not look at that medium in the future. It's kind of like that's the same struggles we're having. So I've had a couple of conversations with you about it where it's like, actually you've come across clients that have gone, we're going to dabble in this again, but here's what happened last time.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to manage an expectation where they don't actually think it's going to be delivered in the first place. Yeah.
And for VR purpose as well, an example I can think of is that I did like this 48-hour game making competition with, it was the global finals for the hackathon. So there were...
And she was amazing.
So this one was in China, and there was teams from every country, and we were given new technologies to work with to develop something in 48 hours. And the thing that surprised me the most from every other group is that they were given these technologies, but no one did anything that you couldn't do another way. Apart from I don't want to say it, but apart from us, but like they were given eye tracking goggles. Like it was a random draw for technology. So we were all working with like HTC Vives and Oculuses, but one were giving the eye tracking thing, some were giving Vive trackers, and some were given like a leap motion thing. And they made games that in my head I could think, but you could have used that with a controller. or you could have used that with with just head gaze.
Or that's a board game.
Or that's a board game adapted. Like, they didn't have a reason for pushing the technology specifically. It was just a general game. And I think the reason, because like one of our programmers was sick for like 24 hours, and the only reason we got as far as we did was because we did something that only that technology can do. And I think it's the same when you're doing something for education, or if you're doing something for enterprise, you need to make sure the client knows that this is something that you can't do by printing out pieces of paper and giving to it, or this is something you can't do by just putting a video on Facebook. This is something unique that no one else is gonna do if no one else is using this technology. And that's sort of like how you would pitch it to who you're working with as something worthwhile doing. So I think the more impressive thing about what we did was the fact that we used locomotion with the Vive trackers, because the Vive trackers for us was hard to do because we felt like you're doing motion capture or it's not that unique. So we did with a motion capture thing where we put a Vive tracker on the stomach of someone, so that we also put it on the end of an object. But the thing we focused on was to try and make it as smooth as possible so that it felt like you were walking at the same speed as you would in real life. You were running the same speed you will in real life. And when you reach over something, you don't go through it. You kind of feels like it's getting the exact same amount of reach you would in real life. And that's what I tried to pitch to the judges, as we tried to use the Vive trackers so that it was unique to the purpose. And the game we made was you were robbing a made up jewelry store thing with like lasers and cameras and like dodging and crawling.
Full body motion, because
body motion.
They were in China. We were struggling with any type of communication other than WeChat.
There's no Google. No one told me before I left that there's no Google. It blew my mind, and I couldn't do anything. Like, I tried to get a VPN, and it was I
was just seeing images come out of people in all sorts of weird locations, and I was trying to figure out what they were doing. But
yeah, we came second, and I'm pretty sure it happened because we had like the vice president of like the biggest the people, like the biggest people in China were just rolling around the floor laughing because they were playing our game, and they were like hitting things, and our object was like an empty water bottle with a Vive tracker attached to the top with rubber bands. But the tracking, we managed to develop it in a way that it was really fun for anyone who played. And so that's sort of how we won them over, because we did something that you wouldn't be able to get that experience without using the Vive trackers.
I was hammering home to them, you've got to answer 2 questions. You've got to answer, what problem are you solving, even if it is with your game, and is there a reason you're doing it in this format? And if there's not, don't do it. Do something else. And that was kind of that's where you'll be different. Like, a lot of people just go, this would be cool. And you just got to stop and think one step further than that before you start.
I just wanted to jump in because I was a judge on the previous competition that then sent you to China.
Yeah.
And I kept telling everyone about the thing that they made because I thought it was brilliant, which was basically just using the technology, but you strapped the Vive controller just to someone's forearm.
Yeah, to the forearm there.
So you could know where the elbow is.
Yeah.
And you made this app that showcased as use cases in physiotherapy. So you could do physiotherapy at home alone without having your therapist with you. It was amazing because the showcase was just, doing this motion while, trying to shoot an arrow or something. But it was exactly a motion that if you're doing it wrong in physiotherapy, you would probably hurt yourself more. And sometimes you're being asked to do exercises when you're trying to recover from some sort of injury, and you don't have the person at home with you. And just having a virtual reality setup that helps you understand how you do the motion was brilliant. And that was something that you could have not done without the technology easily. So yeah, that was awesome. I loved it.
Thank you.
And then the other question actually came from a conversation I had with you at breakfast, but it was, when you have gotten through all of that, you've found the client that actually has a use case that makes complete sense for this medium, and then you realize that they're actually in a very slow moving industry that's very slow to adapt to digital format. So if you make them a tool, it's not just the marketing person or the contact you're working with. It's getting the actual end users to actually use it and value it as a tool. Have you had any struggles in that area? Do you have any like advice on how you kind of do that faster? And like our example there was our stuff we do in the medical field. We're about a year in on a project that's only had one patient go through it, and they're like, oh, we had great results with that one patient, and we're like, awesome. So we've got to get these clinicians to actually buy into it, otherwise it will never go any further. But it was the perfect example of this medium working.
Yeah, so previously to what I'm doing now, I worked at a startup that was making augmented reality app for the utilities industry. So you could see pipes. And it meant that contractors could use it to, with high accuracy GPS, to see where underground utilities were so they didn't cut through pipes or burst a gas main. And the big issue that we were facing, and that company still faces, is that the utility industry is incredibly slow moving. Most of the people working in there are used to working with pen and paper. They're not used to using technology. They're not used to taking devices out with them in the field. However, this technology will make accessing information so much faster, because right now you have to submit requests, you have to get paper plans, you have to take those paper plans with you. There's a whole process. If you find some information that's missing, you have to submit a work order request, an update request that has to go back to the data center, who then input the data, and it's a hugely slow-moving process. So the solution was a solution to a real problem that exists for an industry that's so slow to move, they couldn't adapt fast enough for that company to continue operating at the level it was operating at. So it had to cut dramatically. That company is still waiting for the industry to catch up and to adopt this technology. So it's important to not only have a solution to a problem, a good solution that's going to make huge cost improvements, but to understand your industry and make sure you're not pushing the technology in an industry that's just not ready for it yet. So it's a really unique situation that AR and VR is in, where there are real solutions to real problems, but there are a lot of fake solutions being pushed out there, a lot of incorrect information, and a lot of people posturing as experts who are not. And so there's we're at the real kind of hump for AR, VR, where we've got to start making solutions for people who want them, who can then go on to showcase it. And I think game developers are in a unique position because we understand technology for AR and VR, because it really started with games. The gamers were the ones who were like, holy shit, holy crap, imagine playing these games in VR. It's amazing. It hasn't been adopted as fast as we thought it might have been. But the game industry were the ones pushing that. And so gamers have this unique understanding for how amazing VR and AR can be. And we are in a position now to apply that passion for technology into industries who really can respond to it. And there's a lot of like Unity and Unreal who are providing support. And you can use those engines not just for gaming, not just for games, but for all sorts of commercial applications. And those skills are they're in high demand. Really high demand. There's not many people who are out there as people who can build for AR and VR, who understand what's needed, and industry is really struggling to find them. So if you're interested in it, it's a really good thing to have knowledge in.
And it can be fun too. I mean, we have like OPAC working with NASA on a space game. Like how cool is that? Like it's when you think of like applications not for gaming, you shouldn't think at all that that's not interesting. I love it. I think it's just as interesting, and if it can make a real world difference, then that's even better.
Krystal's just been working on a forensics training simulator for police, and it's gone as far now as we're like, actually, this is a game. Like, it's not just a training simulator for police. Now we just need to develop it further and create a story and actually turn it into what Krystal's always been trying to turn it into, I think, which is a game.
I got way too into it.
And so my final question, just before we throw it over to you guys, and hopefully you have a little bit of questions for us, or something that you guys have struggled with that we can kind of all complain about together. But where do you see this going? Like, where do you see the future of AR, VR? How fast do you see it adapting? Coming from the Australia side of well, it's not that far away from us, but I find Australia's market very different because we have an office over there as well, and the requirements for Australia are completely different to New Zealand. So yeah, just like a final, what do you think's happening? Where is your vision? Where do you see it going?
Yeah,
it's a very broad question.
I think that it's interesting watching people play VR, AR, and MR off against each other, especially because a lot of people have got agendas to push, and you can track where the money's going. I think that all of them are holistically there's very similar technologies that are applied in different contexts and environments. We don't brand ourselves as a VR company. We brand ourselves as an emerging technology company because we look at the applications of new technology and how they can be applied to solve both existing and novel problems or unconventional problems. Where we think the technology will head to. VR in its consumer market is definitely in a defining stage right now. So what the uptake of the price drops will do to the numbers will be interesting. We had Rockstar do an announcement of a VR game that's coming out in November, and we've obviously got the ZeniMax titles coming out as well, and watching how they impact the consumer market will be interesting. In B2B, VR is actually very, very strong in that field and that market. Like in the last 60 days or 30 days, we've already had double-digit in the millions of dollars investment into VR. That's non-games. So the technology field doesn't really care about the consumer market at all, to be frank about that, right? Because the uptake of the technology in its B2B applications is going to probably eclipse the consumer market for the comparable future. When you're talking about B2B, or defense or aerospace, aviation, utilities and police uptake of VR, you're looking at projects that can help define the identity of a studio. And to put that into perspective, there was a company called L3 who did the NASA's virtual reality laboratory in the 1980s. I mean, when they got that contract, it was $114 million contract for them. And then the largest out of the largest largest 10 contractors for defense industries in the world, 3 of them are simulation contractors that create virtual reality or augmented reality or visualization software, basically. So the B2C market is just, it comes and goes, and we'll see how the technology uptakes to that. But the B2B market is a different beast altogether, and we're only now seeing companies start to pitch B2B as they become disillusioned with the B2C model. So we think that enterprise will have a huge factor into it. AR is going to be probably much more successful in the consumer market because of how social and easily accessible it is with AR Kit and AR Core. And VR is probably going to have its defined place in gaming once the kits are a little bit more accessible and a little bit more affordable as well. That's my opinion anyway. So yeah.
Well, I think what I would like to see at the very least in the future is for other industries to recognize a little bit more what game developers do. Like, you're a living example, and I'm a living example for why that's useful. And whenever we go to conferences that are tangible to the games industry or to simulation or whatever, we're surprised by how many people are now gamification experts and experts on this weird thing, and you're like, we've been doing this for the last 30 years. And it's really awkward and weird because once these people actually meet proper game developers who have been doing this for a long time and who are literally experts on interactivity and designing for humans, right? They see the difference and are usually really surprised by how far we are in the field already. For example, Earthlight, the thing that we're working on, just won an award at a simulation congress the other day. And it was slightly awkward because a lot of the other people have never really interfaced with game developers and have seen the quality of our work and were just really surprised. And sometimes that has positive reactions and sometimes that has a lot of envy reactions. But I think it would be more awesome to work together and to exchange knowledge, because there are things that they know that we don't know and vice versa. So I want to work with these people, and I want, if you're by any chance from any of these industries, please come talk to us, because I think what our collaboration with NASA has taught me is that they are unique in respecting our expertise, and there's no discussion about that. We are experts in that field, and that makes our collaboration so valuable and so intense. And I love working with these people because, learning and exchanging is the highest goal of what they do, and that's why they are best at what they do.
Results are going to come from collaboration with game developers where there's actually mutual respect. Not like there can be some industries where they say we want it to be exactly like this, and we're like, well, what about rewards? What about player motivation? What about how long the game is going for? Well, the experience is going for, and they don't want it until you show them good and you show them bad, and then they go with what you said originally. It takes time. It takes patience. It pisses you off a little bit, but at the end of the day, like I think gradually, once more of these applications, like you get like opaque space, like once that starts to get more known, I think that there's going to be more respect for game developers and working together, and then way better things can come out, because virtual reality just has a lot of power that people don't actually realize, especially spatially, and making people like affecting emotions and stuff like that. It can do a lot of good in the world if people can just. Not to be all cheesy or anything, but yeah.
Totally agree with all of that. Yeah.
Cool.
Do you have a?
I pretty much agree.
Yeah.
VR in the commercial space is huge. The problems that they can solve. For example, creating real environments. So market research, for example, and product placement example. So building virtual worlds where you can track consumer behaviour. Is going to cut costs massively. There are so many business applications for VR that eclipse the consumer needs. That VR in the business space it's a real value, and it's where the technology will grow. And then, I mean, you guys pretty much said everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, and people aren't going to use your applications if it's just one-sided. If it's just a game and has no outside input from the specialist, then it's not going to do what it needs to do. And if it's the other way around, then no one's going to want to play it because it's boring. No one's going to want to do it because it's boring or waste time. So it needs to be joint.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? None. We kind of covered it that well.
Yeah?
Yeah.
This week being my first. Oh, thank you. This week being my first introduction into VR, both using it and looking at the aspects of creating it, and looking to make a career shift. And you guys and other people have really sold me and excited me with this vision of what's possible, and the potentially huge demand and usefulness that this could bring to the world and businesses and people. What would you suggest or need or recommend if you were looking for people to come along and help your companies grow in that space? What kind of skill sets or learning would you guys recommend?
That's an excellent question. For us being in New Zealand, it's an interesting place to be. Positive in the fact that we can get a lot done here. So things like the New Zealand Fire Service job, where they actually gave us a house and were like, burn this down. And we were like, well, if we were in the US, how far would we have gotten on that project? So it's like a great place for R&D because of the access. Our hospital project, they shut down the hospital. Like when would that ever happen? Yeah. So that's amazing. But when it comes to finding staff, or we really have to rely on the university. So we have to either advise or constantly take students and put them through a upskilling process, which then costs our company, which is still in startup phase, 6 months of time and energy, and you need to make sure you're putting that into the right person. So when you're upskilling someone, my underlying factor is always attitude, and that's it. Like I can work with anything that starts with a good attitude. So I think I kind of touched. I met you last night. Is that right? Yeah. So I mean, the fact that you've now been to 2 different VR kind of focused business workshops just to find out what's going on in the industry is the perfect first step. But yeah, it's making yourself available to companies, finding out what your interests are as well, because if we're going to train somebody and put in 6 months to a year, we want to make sure we retain that person, because that's a lot of energy. So we find skill sets that we need and make sure they're doing things they want to be doing. And if part of that includes, particularly in our team where I'm the oldest, which is bizarre because I don't feel that old, but I do at work, is they all want to travel because they're all like 20, 21. So part of their job with us will include travel to make sure that they can move around, and we retain them essentially because we will constantly be upskilling. What I tell you right now will already change tomorrow is another thing to take into consideration. Like we're finding we'll be halfway through something and it'll change. So we need to deal with constant upskilling. I think I'm not an expert in games. I'm not an expert in commercialization. I'm an expert in learning new things really quickly. And that's why we are kind of doing so well, I think, is that we adapt instantly and we have to be able to.
I agree with all of those. Yeah.
If you're looking, are you also looking for recommendations of what skills to learn, like practical skills, or?
Yeah, so let's say we have everything that she's just mentioned in terms of attitude and desires. Just real world, practical, hands-on, or knowledge skills. Okay, maybe just like super quick to touch on that, to give you some ideas. Obviously, game design, because even the people who work in other fields in our company need to know some of that, because VR is so weird and new, and even if you've been a game designer for the last 6 years like me, there's a lot of things that you just can't apply to VR design. That's just the way it is, because all of a sudden, people just, if you think people don't read in normal games, you have not seen them in VR. No one reads anything in VR ever. So you can't have any text, or usually you can't have any text. Voiceover, no one listens to voiceover ever. I feel it's just no one does it. So you rely on all of a sudden a completely new skill set of messaging and learning techniques for your player that you have to figure out all of a sudden. And it's also really physical. Like it's a super physical kind of technology, right? So you all of a sudden have to know bodies really well. So learn that. Learn how bodies work. How do people like interacting? If you wanna make them run around a lot, people will probably not do that a lot because they don't like it. Then there's locomotion. So learn how bodies work. Learn behavioral psychology, because if you don't have really obvious like voiceover or text on screen anymore as your avenues for teaching people how to do things in VR, you need to find other ways. So these two things.
And like learning, like don't. A real good skill, attitude to have is to like enjoy learning new things. I know it sounds so basic, but if I have someone on my team and I say, hey, this new tech came out, we really want to try this, want to adapt it to our project, and they're just like, not really interested in it, and then it's like, this stuff is cool and it's so beneficial to be able to learn new skills. Like you can't just want to keep to what you know, because that just does not work in this industry, because technology changes every single day. So that's my 2 cents.
The thing I've been dealing with a lot lately is either people who are doing I'm mostly dealing with B2B with tech savvy people who were the early adopters of Google Cardboard and got really burned on it, or people who have never picked up a game controller and you hand them the Vive thing and they don't know the trigger button exist. And those are like 2 extremes that I'm dealing with, because like in games, I know that most people have game design knowledge existing, but in VR, the market is not that. And I was wondering how you all dealt with that situation, or if
I
you
feel so strongly about this. Because I've had the exact same problem so many times, and it's so difficult, because how are you gonna? It's weird because especially our interactive headsets, like the Oculus and the Vive, are really gamer consumer focused, because the input devices are weird hybrids of VR, but also game controllers, weird as hell. So I think partially it needs time. Like every new technology and every new input device needs time. You know, when you remember when the mouse for computers came out, it took forever for people to get used to it, and there were games that literally taught them. That's why Minesweeper exists, just in case you didn't know. Minesweeper exists to teach people how to use the mouse and stuff like that. Look it up; it's awesome. But also, the other side is the actual physical technology, because if you have worked with the Oculus versus the Vive, I feel like the Oculus controllers are a million times more intuitive for
they've
people.
got things that detect a pointing gesture.
Yeah, just by touch.
However, have you seen somebody try and pick them up that's never picked them up before?
Oh, I know.
Yeah, a game
You need to give it to
hold them
them
the right way.
I had my worst experience ever with someone putting them in, never ever really touched a controller in their life, and I tried to put them in an Oculus game that I'd only tested with my team and not really with Aliesha, so that was my mistake. She hadn't broken it yet, and they picked it up and they just stood like this. And they just didn't do anything.
And they couldn't see their hands.
They couldn't see their hands because they were standing like this. And I was like, move your hands out. And they're just like, and they go like that. And I'm like
so
it
just
was
being
so
able
hard.
to do that and expecting to see it wasn't even there.
I had exactly the same issues. So that's why I say learn bodies, because when people are anxious and they're in a new environment, what do? They
go like this. And then they can't see the controllers. They look down, they can't see anything, and you can't show them because they've got a headset on. Always just try and chuck people in it that have never touched it before. Like, it's going to be a horrible experience for everyone involved, but you'll learn a lot.
Like we put somebody in your hackathon game, and we didn't even think about it. But when we put it in it, she just started screaming and didn't move, and took it off and just went, "That's so weird." And we were just like, "You didn't even do anything. You didn't press any buttons. You didn't.
She
move
took it
or
off.
anything."
She was actually on the ground at some point. Outside of the headset. It's on our Facebook page if you guys want to see it. It's actually
I couldn't. She would have no idea what she'd just done because she didn't move. She didn't take a step. She didn't ask us anything. She just put it on, started screaming, but with I don't know. It wasn't fear, but it wasn't also joy either. It was just
like, what the hell?
And then she took it off and went, "No, that's cool." And we're like, "You didn't do anything. you didn't play the game at all or touch anything." She's like, "I didn't need to. That was amazing." And we're like,
I think
I took it as a compliment.
We have exactly. Those are just universal for anyone who works in VR. At some point, you have encountered a person who's either screaming in your headset and afterwards telling you it was awesome without even having done anything.
Yeah.
Or we're finding as well, a lot of our tools are for middle age. That takes so much more teaching or convincing to use, whereas the first one that we made was for generally people over the age of 5, under the age of 16. They kind of were already intuitive on it, but then we tried it on someone a little bit younger just to see what would happen, and it was strange because her parents hadn't let her use tablets or phones, so she hadn't even had that experience, and she couldn't she just completely crumbled. And it was that's what a non-digital child is like they haven't adapted to it. So you can't even assume that just kids will get it, because we've come across a lot of kids that they also don't get it. So it's, even though you guys are making for a kid base, you've still got that percentage that actually just can't figure it out, or
totally
intuitive.
Different for us. I think the fact that they don't have a headset on, that they're in a park and that they can run, their instinct is not to tap, or even though we have tappable elements, their instinct is to run towards the thing that they want to get to. So we find that the AR for the smaller devices on kids is really intuitive, whereas adults are totally different. Adults will pick it up and they start tapping on things. They won't physically move, they won't walk towards something because it's not natural behavior that they've learnt by using their mobile devices. Whereas kids who have had mobile device exposure but I guess aren't as entrenched in their mobile device mechanics, they will intuitively just run.